We like to think political dynasties disappeared when monarchies lost power. But family names are still everywhere. You can see them in political families like the Kennedys, the Bushes, and the Gandhis, and in business families like the Murdochs and the Trumps. The tricky part is this: family advantage can sometimes look like talent. Maybe a person from a powerful family really does become better over time. A successor in a family business may grow up learning the trade. In politics, members of certain families may genuinely learn how to serve people well. So the question is not that straightforward. Are these families staying powerful because they produce better public servants? Or does power itself make it easier for the next family member to rise also? In other words, are dynasties earned or are they reinforced by the system? Hi, I'm Sumit Malik, a researcher at the University of Amsterdam, and welcome to The Devil Wears Data, where I break down interesting and important research for you. Because here is the problem. A lot of research is written by scientists for other scientists, not for you. But if you're curious, you're at the right place. So what did these researchers study? They put together historical data of members of the US Congress from 1789 to 1996. So that's a fairly long period. They collected information on family ties and election histories. Then they tracked which politicians had relatives in Congress before them or after them, and how long each politician stayed in office. So really, they were following political careers across generations. And they wanted to answer a simple but important question. Do some families just produce better politicians, or does being in office make it more likely that a relative will get elected later? To answer that, they used a clever comparison. They looked at politicians who barely won re-election and compared them with politicians who barely lost re-election. Why does that help? Because people who barely win and people who barely lose are usually very similar. The only difference is that one group stays in office longer and the other does not. That makes this a useful way to get closer to cause and effect. And here is what they found. Serving more than one term roughly doubles the chance that legislator will have a relative enter Congress. The odds rise from about 1 in 17 to about 1 in 8. So that is a very large effect. Now next, the authors asked, what kind of people are these dynastic politicians? One possible defense of political dynasties is that they reflect a genuine family commitment to public service. In fact, a lot of them publicly claim that. Maybe a parent in Congress inspires the next generation to serve too. If that is true, then we might expect these family members to slowly work their way up through politics, starting in local and lower offices before reaching Congress. But this is not what the researchers found. Politicians from dynastic families were actually less likely to have prior public experience before entering Congress. In other words, they were less likely to follow the usual political ladder. That matters because non-dynastic politicians often spend years building experience in local and state level office before they can seriously compete for a seat in Congress. Dynastic politicians, by contrast, seem more able to bypass that longer path. So this makes the public service vocation explanation less convincing. Now, another possible defense of political dynasties is that they're politically talented. The authors then investigated, are these dynastic politicians succeeding because they inherit broad political talent or because they inherit local advantages? If it is really about talent, then these advantages should travel. A dynastic politician should be able to win support even outside their home base. But if it is mainly about things like name recognition, family networks, and local connection, then their advantage should be strongest only in the places where the family is already known. And the evidence points to the second explanation. Dynastic politicians were less likely to win elections outside their home state. That suggests that they are not mainly inheriting a general political skill that works everywhere. Instead, they seem to inherit local assets, a familiar family name, political relationships, and an established network in a particular place. Finally, the researchers looked at competition. Now, someone might argue, even if dynastic politicians have advantages, maybe that is not a big problem if elections are still highly competitive. So the researchers tested that. They looked at how politically competitive a state was, meaning how evenly the power was split between the two major US parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Now, the idea behind this is simple. If dynasties benefit from party connections and are protected from political competition, then they should be more common in states where one party dominates and competition is really weak. And that is exactly what the data shows. States with more intense political competition had fewer dynastic politicians. In fact, the researchers estimate that under perfect competition, dynastic prevalence would fall by about 40%. So taken together, researchers found dynasties are not mainly driven by deeper public service and not mainly by transferable talent. They seem to depend much more on inherited local advantages and weaker political competition. And this is in the US, the so-called meritocratic heaven. Imagine what the results would be if the researchers had done the same research in the Eastern economies, like India. So what do we do with this research? For voters, the lesson is simple. A familiar surname should not be treated as automatic proof of quality. It's simple and straightforward. For political parties and public institutions, the message is they should widen their recruitment and strengthen competition. Because as this study shows, more competition makes dynasties less powerful. Political dynasties do better when the system is less competitive and when access is easier to protect. Now, at the same time, we should be careful not to overclaim what this paper proves. The researchers show that political advantage is being passed down within families, but they cannot say with certainty which inherited asset matters most. Is it the name recognition? Is it the donor networks, party connections, easier access to political insiders? The study doesn't claim any mechanism. The study shows that dynastic advantage exists, but it cannot fully isolate the exact mechanism behind it. Still, the broader takeaway is important. Tenure or longer term in office can help reproduce political power within families, making democracy look more merit-based than it really is. Political families can change the rules of the game in their favor. That can make the inherited advantage look like merit. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time with another important research on CEO hypocrisy.